Thank you so much, Alex. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us here today. Hi, Jordi. And thanks to the entire SaaStock team for pulling this off. If maybe the guys in the background could bring up the slides really quick. Thank you. Yeah, as Alex has mentioned, I did this presentation about the 8 do's and don'ts for SaaS startups with Nick, the co-founder and CEO of Chartmogul in Dublin a couple of years ago. And I thought it would be worth revisiting those do's and don'ts with the co-founder and CEO of Factorial, Jordi Romero, which is one of the fastest growing SaaS companies out of Europe. So maybe I'll just hand it over to Jordi for a super quick intro. And then what I was planning to do is that we very quickly, because we only have a total of 20 minutes, go through these do's and don'ts. I explain super briefly what the idea was. If you want to take a closer look, you'll still find this video online. And then I'm curious to hear what Jordi has to say, if these do's or don'ts are, like, if he agrees with them, or if they're bullshit, or if we should replace them by something else.
Thank you, Christoph. So I'm glad to be here next to you. I learned a lot by following your content, and now I'm glad to be here, sharing our experiences together with Factorial and learning everything about SaaS. So yeah, let's see how many years, this still holds up. So let's go through them.
All right, amazing. So the first one of our 8 do's and don'ts for SaaS startups revisited is don't give away your product too cheaply. Probably quite obvious what we had in mind there when we created this presentation a couple of years ago. Our experience was, and I would say still is, that many startups tend to give away products too cheaply, especially when it comes to like the enterprise, because founders are, I think, often not really used to like selling to enterprise customers, and so they might be scared to ask for the money which they maybe should ask for. So that was in a very, very small nutshell what we were talking about there, and curious to get some feedback from you, Jordi.
So yeah, I mean, the first time I saw this, my first reaction is not just cheaply, it's for free. There is this concept that everybody talks about, which is freemium, which sounds like, most successful SaaS companies somehow do freemium, and then you do it yourself without really thinking if you're the best kind of company and product and target customers for this business model. And, we did this mistake. So we spent maybe 3 years actually battling with freemium and struggling to sell and to create revenues with a very aggressive freemium value proposition. And the main reason we did that is because our final goal is to impact as many organizations as possible, right? So there is nothing more attractive than free stuff. There is basically infinite demand for free stuff. So we thought we'll make it free, and then we'll figure out a way to make revenue. And that will guarantee that we have as many companies as possible. So not just cheap, but free. And, you were part of this learning. We were struggling to make our MRR and ARR go up. And then eventually we kind of revisited this assumption. Is like, do we have to be that aggressive with the freemium? And then we went to a lot more traditional, premium SaaS subscription model, still cheap, but not free. And basically what happened is 2 things. One is our revenues grew significantly, very fast, and in a very healthy and sustainable way. And the second thing that happened is that pretty much everybody that was using our product were willing to pay. So our fear that our product would only be successful if it was free, or it only would be used if it was free, was absolutely false. And there was even some negative signaling, meaning that there were some businesses that were using us for free that would never eventually pay. So that's not what freemium is about. Freemium is about generating demand for customers that will eventually pay. And actually some larger customers and more sophisticated buyers wouldn't use us for free because they wouldn't rely on us. They wouldn't trust us, thinking we might sell the data or show ads or something like that. So we started actually having users and customers from segments that wouldn't trust us when we were free. They would compare us to Facebook or something like that.
Yeah, very good points, Jordi. I have fond memories of our discussions about that topic, and I think indeed freemium is great for some companies that have certain characteristics, and I think we don't have enough time to go into all of them. But it's not the right model for everybody. And we added one slide here just before this talk, which shows, like, with the numbers a bit redacted here to not give away too much detail, but like just to see the jump in the quarter when we did this pricing change. So I remember that this was quite a transformative change, which I think unlocked a lot of what came after it.
Yeah. And since then, going back to the cheap thing, we doubled prices twice, actually. So still, we went from free to premium, and we still went to cheap. And I think it's okay. It's a learning process, but I 100% subscribe that don't give away the product too cheap, because then you're not positioning yourself as a valuable solution. And we are a valuable solution. Otherwise, people wouldn't buy and spend their time and put their critical HR data on our platform if they didn't believe that we added value. So definitely increase prices as often as you have to.
Yeah, perfect. All right. The next point is that this is one where Nick had a fun slide on this. Is that don't assume that because you're growing 20% month over month in your first year, you can do the same in the second year. This is, obviously we see a lot of pitch decks and financial plans, and it's always tempting to extrapolate early traction, but as if the absolute numbers are very small, then it's comparably easy to have high relative growth. But as you get to bigger scale, it just gets much more difficult to keep up with it, unless there is really a viral growth engine built into the product, which is fundamentally exponential. So over to Jordi, if you have anything to add there. Or
yeah, I wouldn't count on virality. That's kind of like winning the lottery. So basically, I think it's good to forecast what 20% month over month growth looks like. And I think it's good for founders and investors to model the business that way. But it's a terrible way of planning and actually making it happen, right? Because you cannot just tell the team grow 20% month over month. It's very hard to think on these terms. And we actually had this discussion between the founders. And we said, okay, we agree we want to grow, let's say 20% month over month. What does this mean in added new euros every month or every quarter or every week? And then we only talk about absolute numbers. And then it looks a lot more difficult, but it also is a lot more specific. So you realize how many more leads you need and how much you need to increase conversion rates and ARPUs and all of the metrics that will eventually lead to this added MRR or ARR. So definitely, it is way harder than it looks like. And you realize that when you make that into absolute numbers of how much you need to add to the business every month. And, we're lucky that we have the recurring revenue business model, but it is hard to add 20% for a long period of time after you're past the 10, 50, 100,000 in MRR. 20% every month is a lot, and it adds up very, very, very fast.
Yeah. It's a great point that it's good to look at the absolute numbers, like the net new MRR or net new ARR that you have to add every single month, and look at how this increases. Because I think this also gives you a sense of just how much is ahead. Like if you are in the beginning of the year, might be still relatively easy or to be on track, but the vast majority of the growth is actually expected to come in the second half, maybe even in the last quarter. So you might even want to adjust your plan to grow to assume that the relative growth rate will actually decrease during the year, because it's just so hard to keep an absolute.
Because it compounds, right? So it gets getting harder and harder.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. The next one is one which maybe, I don't know if it's still worth mentioning it today. Maybe this has become pretty obvious, but I remember that 5 to 10 years ago, some founders, at least for my taste of my assessment, were trying to reinvent too many things, whether that's not using some of the existing tools out there, like from a tech infrastructure point of view, or trying to come up with a really creative way to do something like sales compensation or employee participation. And my sense is that there are so many things on a founder's or management team's plate that you really have to pick your battles carefully and think about what is it that you're really special at and that you want to innovate in. It's usually product, sometimes go to market, but I think there are some things where you most likely don't want to reinvent the wheel, especially not in the beginning. And this is things like, as I mentioned, like sales compensation. Like there's just such a mountain of experience from others. And similarly, I think by using some of the latest and greatest technologies out there, and there's so much more today than even 5 years ago in terms of marketing automation and sales tech and all of that. So I think that can be a big accelerator, and I think you shouldn't miss that.
Yeah, I definitely think that one didn't age well. I think it's too obvious today. We have so much great content, so many great platforms that it's kind of obvious that you need to go with the industry standards of everything.
Yeah. So that seems to be non-controversial, but if anybody disagrees, I'm curious to hear any dissenting views on that as well. The next one is a point which Nick 5 years ago illustrated with a slide of a couple of segways, which was one of these products that got so much hype before it was even launched. And he said that you shouldn't mistake latent demand for product market fit. And what he meant by that was that product market fit is this very important milestone, sometimes hard to pinpoint in the journey of a company, where once you've achieved it, you're ready to start to scale and put money and resources into sales and marketing. And sometimes you might think you have product market fit, but actually it's only that your product resonates with a very small demographic of users who maybe are very much like you, because maybe you're solving your own problem. And so the point was that you need to be, before you really spend on scaling and growing, you need to think about whether you have some product market fit in any significant segment, and take a look at that.
Yeah, I think I have a love-hate relationship with the concept of product market fit, because it's very hard to really define it in a absolute and deterministic way. It's like love or something like that. You know it when you have it, and this is the kind of definition that people have. And I agree. You can definitely feel when the market is pulling from you. It's not an uphill battle to sell to each customer. But going back to your point, I think that you do struggle, or you fight very hard to find the first product market fit, and that's typically a very narrow niche. Usually very early adopters in one vertical, maybe one geography, one customer segment. So it's a very narrow definition, and I think that's the right thing to do. But then the challenge of scaling an organization or a startup is to keep finding product market fit with the next vertical, with a larger customer segmentation, with a new geography, or with a new product that you're offering to the same market and that you don't have fit yet. So basically, maybe you find product market fit for a very, very small niche, but this niche needs to be expandable into other segments and niches and geographies and products that you're solving. And that's a lot of work, actually a lot more work to keep doing that, especially as the company scales and as the organization gets larger. You're not so fast. You cannot move fast and break things all the time, because you already have customers from your first product market fit. So you cannot just redo everything every day, right? You need to keep adding things incrementally, and it gets harder and harder. And there is this concept that I didn't understand until I felt it, that from 0 to 1 million in ARR, that's kind of like a Series A clear product market fit stage for B2B startups or SaaS startups. You can really break everything and invent and be very aggressive to find this product market fit. And then from 1 to 10, I found that it's a horrible transition, because you need to keep reinventing a lot, because probably your segment is too niche, but you cannot break things so much anymore. And your organization is kind of designed full of hackers and hustlers and people who would just get things done very fast, but maybe they're not very good at keeping up with what they already did. So you need to transition your organization into not losing this speed while keeping these customers happy and engaged, and make sure that you don't mess them up by changing the product too much or changing the way you serve these customers. So yeah, that's definitely still a huge challenge today.
Yeah. Cool. Next one is don't screw up your fundraising. I think what this is about is probably clear from the title of this bullet point. If you go down the path of a fast-growing venture-backed startup, you have to raise money probably every couple of years, and so this becomes one of the most important parts of the job. I would argue. Obviously, there are many other equally important parts, but still, as a CEO, you still have to make sure you have money in the bank, and the skill of how to raise is not something I think you can take for granted. You also have to, I guess, learn it. And yeah, happy to hear, Jordi, if you have any points to add there.
Well, we have our own share of experience raising money. We raised $100 million for Factorial so far, and we've done different approaches and definitely learned from them. So there are a few things that I think people don't take into account, which is making a process and designing a fundraise is really important. It's not just you're gonna do it a few times in your life, maybe, probably. But you still need to build the whole process and think of it as a sales or a go-to-market, right? Where you generate a pipeline, you qualify the investors, you make them progress through the pipeline until the stage where you really have them all at the same time, and then you're trying to collect term sheets and then negotiate and making sure that, again, you're picking the best investor for the company. So I'd say taking the process seriously is definitely something that most people I know don't do this well. Many people fall in love with one investor, and then they think, oh, Christoph, I definitely want to raise money from Christoph, and maybe Christoph is not interested, and then you're worth nothing, and that's fine. Christoph says no to startups every day. It's his job to say no, and sometimes say yes. And some people fall in love with Sequoia, and they think that if they don't manage to get Sequoia's attention, they're a failure. So not falling in love and being explicit and organized about having a proper fundraising process, I think, is really important. And then, there's so much content about fundraising, but there is so much you can screw up that you shouldn't. So definitely pay attention to what your company is optimizing for. I think in earlier stages, the brand of the investor is really important. The personal brand and the firm brand is going to have a massive impact in subsequent investments. And then probably in a growth or late stage, that's not so important anymore, and you're becoming more of a financial transaction where the company has its own merit. And it's not because Christoph invested that is a cool company or an interesting business. It's just, the numbers speak by themselves. But in the early stages, the numbers don't say much.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think, and what we talked about a few years ago was also very much in line with that, to really view fundraising as a process, so that you control the timeline, that you build a pipeline, and that you also, similar to the sales process, that you also honestly disqualify people really quickly. And you can only do this if you have a good pipeline, right? If you're only talking to 3 investors, you're scared of disqualifying one of them, because then maybe nobody is left. So you need a decent pipeline, and then you should, I think, anybody who doesn't get back to you pretty quickly, you should just assume they have different priorities. Don't take it personal, and move on to those that get it quickly.
Yep. Timing is everything.
Yeah. This is, I think, a very special topic, which, especially in the context of Factorial, we could probably talk about for a much longer time. This is a point from Nick, but I agreed with it, at least at the time when we were presenting this. So the idea here was that as a SaaS startup, almost everybody should try to do everything to win the US, because at least traditionally, most big software categories were kind of decided in the US, whether you look at customer support, Zendesk, or sales automation, CRM, Salesforce, and all the categories, you name it. And the idea is that if you win the US, you can like grow. Basically, you have a much bigger market that you can address in a relatively homogeneous way with one like language, one go-to-market motion, and once you're really big in the US, you can still go after other countries. Now there are companies like Factorial in markets that require a lot of localization, specific not only languages but all kinds of other changes. And I think here it's quite different from let's say CRM software. So happy to get your take on that, Jordi.
Yeah, I mean, definitely fighting to prove that this is definitely the wrong do right now in 2021. So my previous company, we moved from Barcelona to San Francisco. It was project management, it was global, and we agreed that we had to be there with, you know, US-based venture capital and with a mainly US market with a spillover in the rest of the world. But in HR technology or in some sort of geographically sensitive SME SaaS, especially, there is more SME buyers in the EU alone than in the US. There's like 80+ million employees in SMEs in the European Union versus around 60 in the US. The maturity of these buyers has evolved a lot. Everybody, thanks to, you know, Microsoft and Google cloud productivity solutions, are kind of used to buying SaaS now. And it's definitely a lot easier to build a SaaS business that makes hundreds of millions of dollars in annual recurring revenue, which, you know, is on the right path to become a category leader, and it's already a, you know, great company and definitely worth IPOing and making history, just with a few markets in the EU, right? So we started in Spain, then we went to France, then Germany, UK. So now we're all over Europe, also Latin America, also starting to look at North America. But I definitely believe you can build category leaders, global category leaders, that don't necessarily start selling to the US or ever sell to the US, although you need a large continent to support that. So either these fintechs that are happening in Latin America or some great B2B SaaS companies in Europe. I don't know much about Asia, but that's definitely wrong in my opinion, and I'm working hard to prove it wrong.
Yeah, and I'm already convinced, right? Like our investment in a Factorial like was based on the assumption that this is a playbook which maybe works for many or most companies, but not for everybody. Yeah. So we're a bit over time, so we need to rush through the last 2 points really quickly. And also, if you have maybe anything to add, if there is a 9th or 10th point, feel free to do it, Jordi. But we have to be really quick now. So the 7th one is I just mentioned it, but I think you can Google it, because I did a bunch of talks and blog posts and presentations about this point. It's kind of one of my favorite topics, is that you have to get your LTV and your CACs aligned. If you think of this as a 2x2 chart, you have these 4 quadrants, and there is one quadrant which is basically the graveyard of SaaS, is where you have low LTV and high CACs. And if you end up in that corner because you're selling an SMB product with an enterprise sales like effort, then this is not going to work. So in that case, you have to think about either changing your pricing or changing your customer segment or finding cheaper ways to market the product.
So my 10-second learning there, usually you start with low LTVs, high CACs, and you hope that LTV will go up and CAC will go down. And LTV will go up, but CAC will also go up. So don't assume that CAC will go down.
Yeah. And the last point here was the Nick's advice that you shouldn't spend money on paid ads early on, and that you should rather invest really in world-class engineering and product and the team. I'm assuming this has become pretty non-controversial too, but curious to see if anybody or you already has anything.
That was maybe more of a .com or early internet advertisement boom. We did use paid ads to learn and then build great content and have organic growth, organic SEO, help us grow our inbound pipeline, but definitely not counting on paid as a sustainable way of generating pipeline, because you really tap out the keywords and the channels very fast, so it doesn't scale usually. So it's better to invest in product and content.
And it can give you this wrong sense of having found a channel, and might lead to these predictions of being able to grow 20% month over month, but channels usually exhaust pretty quickly. So I think we have to wrap up. Thank you so much, Jordi, for your time. I'll see you tomorrow for the first time in person after way too long. Thanks everybody for joining, and thanks Alex for letting us go over time a little bit.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Christoph.
Thanks, Christoph and Jordi. Yeah, we had to let that one finish, and it was great. So great to see this revisited. Hope this gets 50,000 views. I don't know if Jordi's put a bet on with Nick who's going to get more views or not, but we'll find out. But that was excellent. So good stuff.
Thank you.
Thanks both. Enjoy the retreat.
Bye.